Today, I'm bringing you 10 must-stash players heading into Week 15 fantasy football. And I understand the fantasy football playoffs are upon us. We need players that are absolutely going to be able to produce and have high-level upside on our bench. So I tried to give some guys that I think could absolutely pop over these next 3 weeks that have high-level upside. We started off with player number 1, and it's going to be Blake Corum for the Los Angeles Rams. And yes, Blake Corum is rostered in 44% of leagues. So they're in one out of every 2 leagues. This guy is available, and he should be added. Right now, we heard reports from Sean McVay and the Rams staff that they want to keep Kyren Williams absolutely fresh and healthy for the playoffs. We saw Kyren Williams in the Week 13 game get a little bit banged up with that ankle. He came back into the game. But, of course, that little scare could definitely hurt the Rams' potential chance to win a Super Bowl. So if they're going to continue to give Blake Corum more and more of the touches, that is going to be exciting because he did put up 14 points versus the Carolina Panthers, where he did have a 33% snap share, but did get 7 rushing attempts for 81 yards and 1 touchdown with an 11.57 yards per carry, which is absolutely electric. Gotta love that for Blake Corum. And so definitely, if you need some running back help, which is kind of the easiest thing, having some of these handcuff running backs at the end of your bench, someone that could pop. If Blake Corum were to somehow be put into the starting lineup, something were to happen to Kyren Williams, we're talking about Blake Corum being an absolute league winner, somebody that's going to have high-end RB2, if potentially not even low-end RB1 upside, if he's getting the full range and outcomes of this backfield. So I like Blake Corum as my first mustache player heading into Week 14. Now, we started off with my second guy, another guy in a very similar circumstance. We've been talking about him almost every week. It's going to be Brian Robinson for the San Francisco 49ers. Christian McCaffrey, absolute league winner. But if something were to happen to Christian McCaffrey, we're talking about Brian Robinson, who easily, even with sometimes a 15 to 20% snap share in this offense, has been able to put up double-digit fantasy points in full PPR. So I could see Brian Robinson being able to return, being a low-end RB1 if something were to happen to CMC. So if you own CMC, make sure you have Brian Robinson. If you don't have CMC, Brian Robinson would be an interesting guy to have on your bench. Not saying anything's going to happen, but we look at the matchups coming up over these next few weeks. Of course, in Week 14, he's on a bye. So he's pretty much free. A lot of people don't have them on the roster because they need that roster space. He's 31% roster, but Week 15, Tennessee, Indianapolis, Chicago, down the stretch, 3 really good matchups. And so, like I said, if you're trying to go for a chip, Week 15, Week 16, you're probably not playing him until Week 16 because nothing's going to happen to CMC this week, but I think it could be an interesting stash on the end of your bench. Nevertheless, my third stash is going to be Tyler Allgeier. And we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons being outside of playoff contention at this point. I'm praying to the gods that Drake London comes back this week, comes back next week. I mean, a lot of us are kind of on the verge of making the playoffs, and we need Drake London. But Tyler Allgeier taking over. He's kind of been a touchdown-dependent RB2. Even with Bijan Robinson, we saw 25% of the snaps in Week 13 versus the Jets, putting up 13.5 fantasy points. 8 attempts for 20 yards, 1 total touchdown, also caught 2 balls. Now, Seattle in Week 14, it's not the best matchup, but Tampa Bay, Arizona, and then the Rams in Week 17. These are some really great matchups, and especially if they're out of playoff contention, they want to give, maybe rest Bijan and make sure that Bijan's going to be good to go for the, 2025, 2026, oh my gosh, 2026 season. They're going to want to make sure that Tyler Allgeier is kind of taking over some more of that work. So I want to be targeting Tyler Allgeier. I think he's an absolute must-stash heading into the fantasy football playoffs. The next running back that should be a stash is going to be Jacory Croskey-Merritt for the Commanders. And yes, this Bill, good old Bill, man, Week 1, 14.7 fantasy points feels so long ago. Even Week 5 versus the Chargers where he put up 27 fantasy points. But we've just kind of continued to see the snap counts drop and drop and drop for Jacory Croskey-Merritt, JCM. We're seeing this kind of 3-headed backfield with him, with Chris Rodriguez, and with Jeremy McNichols. But Jeremy McNichols is the third down back, and then Chris Rodriguez is the early down workhorse that's been getting most of the touches. So we've been seeing some very, very bad outputs from JCM. But there is the chance that Jaden Daniels is going to be coming back this week or next week in the matchups. Giants, Philly, Dallas down the stretch for JCM. Even in Week 14 versus Minnesota, I'm not saying that you should start JCM by any stretch of the imagination, but these are some pretty good matchups, especially if Jaden Daniels is coming back healthy, which for a lot of you, you're hoping, especially if you kind of have been waiting on the chance that Jayden Daniels should come back. Do we think he should come back? That's a whole different discussion. Whole nother video. Are they going to RG3 Jayden Daniels? I don't know. But if he's out there, you got to be playing him even after that absolute gruesome injury. Jacory Croskey-Merritt is only rostered in 43% of sleeper leagues, so fits this kind of stash build that we're going to want on our lineups with the upside at running back. And my last and final upside shot at running back. This is probably for like a deep league. He's got high-end appeal. It's going to be Tank Bigsby. We've seen some absolutely electric games. I've talked about Tank Bigsby as a really good stash. Now, of course, something would happen to Saquon Barkley to make this worth it, but week 15 versus Vegas, week 16 versus the Commanders, and then week 17 versus Buffalo for the fantasy football playoffs. Of course, Saquon Barkley could absolutely bounce back, be the league winner that you need, but you want to make sure that if you have Saquon Barkley, and even if you don't and you're in a deeper league, Tank Bigsby would be someone that I would be looking to add. Now, final guy here in the running back conversation that I think not a lot of people are talking about, it's Michael Carter for the Arizona Cardinals. Trey Benson was supposed to be coming off of IR. He's been in his 21-day practice window, and this is his last week, and he still hasn't practiced. So there's a chance that we could see Trey Benson go on like season-ending IR, which would mean that it is the Zonovan night and the Michael Carter show. Lean into Michael Carter. We saw double-digit fantasy points in week 13. He's only rostered in 11% of leagues. He's got the Rams, Houston, Atlanta down the stretch. Now, Zonovan Knight has been a little bit better on the ground, whereas Michael Carter, of course, has kind of been used in that third down role. But let's not remember back in week 5 versus Tennessee, he did put up 18 fantasy points in that matchup, and he's kind of been relevant throughout this whole entire fantasy football season. I want to lean into Michael Carter. I understand it feels risky, but I think if you maybe need some like guaranteed production, Michael Carter is there as somebody that even if he were to start would give you, RB3 type-ish, flex-ish numbers. I think you can make the case that the other running backs that I talked about a little bit ahead of this, like if something were to happen, they're, low in RB1, high in RB2 for sure, knowing that they don't have to split the backfield. But that is something to kind of consider with Michael Carter, as he is 11% rostered in sleeper leagues. Now, the next player that we're going to be talking about is going to be Jalen Coker for the Carolina Panthers. Coke heads unite. We saw a 17 fantasy football point outing, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown versus the Rams. Now, Jalen Coker is on bye in week 14, so he's not necessarily helping your team, but he's clearly emerging as that second-tier option. There's a reason the Carolina Panthers traded away Adam Thielen at the beginning of the season. Of course, the injury to Jalen Coker did not help them at all, but he is 8% rostered in sleeper leagues. And as a guy that got 6 targets, looked pretty explosive, looked good. Let's also consider he's 6'3". He's a big slot level wide receiver. We like these big slots for Bryce Young. Bryce Young's a little bit smaller, can't always see over the offensive line, but boy, can he see Ted McMillan and Jalen Coker when they're out there. We got to absolutely love things for Jalen Coker going forward. I think if you need some wide receiver help, definitely there to look at Jalen Coker. And then my other guy is going to be Luther Burden, who we have seen get over a 50% snap share the last 2 weeks. He's 20% rostered on sleeper leagues. He is the wide receiver 72. 6 targets for 4 receptions, 33 yards. Wasn't the greatest day, but we're continuing to see Luther Burden build on week after week. 49, 44, 51, 51% of snaps. And I just think Luther Burden honestly looks still like the most explosive wide receiver in the Bears offense. I understand there's DJ Moore. I understand there's Rome Odunze, though they're a little bit more of a different type of wide receiver than Luther Burden. But I just think if they continue to get him the ball out in space, that is exciting. And the fact that he's continuing to play ahead of Zach Zaccheaus, that's really good things for Luther Burden. So definitely want to be targeting Luther Burden as a stash. Like I said, I prefer the running backs. I think this is more of a Hail Mary at this point, but you got to like where we're sitting at with some of these stashes when it comes to these running backs and then some of these wide receivers. Now, I like to always give you guys some defenses to be looking ahead about. So some of the defenses that we could play here, I'm going with my first mustache defense. It is going to be the Dallas Cowboys, as the Dallas Cowboys are going up in week 15 versus Minnesota. Now, could we see J.J. McCarthy by this point start to get things going? The Minnesota Vikings have just been a team that I want to be attacking. They're throwing a lot of interceptions, even if it is J.J. McCarthy. Also getting a ton of sacks, especially with the Aaron Jones injury. We're looking at a front kind of 4 for the Dallas Cowboys that's been really good against the run. So for me, lean into that matchup. I do like that for the Dallas Cowboys, as they are only 6% rostered. So they're out there for you. Now, I like the Tampa Bay Bucks matchup. Honestly, the next 2 weeks, this week versus New Orleans, next week versus Atlanta, 2 really good back-to-back matchups. Honestly, week 16 versus Carolina, 17 Miami, 18 Carolina. Like, we could see the Bucs defense really get on a roll here, which could be interesting. I think they're really good play this week and next week. So if for some reason the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are out there, they're 70% roster. So I feel like they don't really fit the category of like a stash defense. But if for some reason they're out there, I do like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And then my last defense that I do think you could target is Washington Commanders. Kind of talked about them. Week 14, also playable, going up against Minnesota. But week 15, they are going up against the Giants, which I do like both of these kind of matchups back to back for them. Now, we haven't seen them get double-digit fantasy points since week 5, but we are continuing to see, even with them giving up 27 points versus Denver, they did have 4 fantasy points in that matchup. They gave up 402 yards. There's a good chance that they can maybe have some success versus Minnesota defense and kind of get things rolling, especially if we get Jaden Daniels back. If we get, we got Terry McLaurin, like their offense is going to start rolling a little bit more, putting them in better situations. So that is exciting for the Washington Commanders. So I do think the Commanders, the Cowboys, and the Tampa Bay Bucs would be 3 defenses that I would be looking to stash. But if you like fantasy football, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button as we are on the way to 3,000 subscribers. Appreciate each and every one of you through your journey. We're answering every start state question down below. So make sure you ask us a question, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.